Hello and happy Thursday. When it comes to suddenly gaining weight during the whole menopause transition, it would be easy to think that it all has to do with changes to our sex hormone, like our estrogen, our progesterone, our testosterone, DHEA. And while those hormones do have an impact on our body composition and our weight management during this whole transition, there are two other hormones that are way more important than we need to think about. The first one is cortisol, and the second one is insulin. And insulin is kind of the key one because cortisol affects insulin. So if you just think about one hormone, it's insulin. That's the one I want you to be thinking about. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. In fact, I have been talking about insulin this entire week. And so if you're just joining in on this topic, you might want to go back to my talks on Monday and Tuesday. On Monday, I just talked a little bit about how our body metabolizes carbohydrates and what the role of insulin is in our bodies as a storage hormone. And then on Tuesday, I talked about insulin resistance and I explained what it is. And we're going to continue that discussion today. And I am going into a little bit of like geeky science here because for me, it's really important that if I'm going to make a change, I need to understand why a change is important. So I hope you don't mind my going into some of the science here and explaining it all. If you just want to be told what to do, that's tomorrow. So tomorrow I will be telling you exactly what to do in order to really support healthy levels of insulin. But again, today I'm jumping a little bit more into like just understanding why it is important. So specifically today, I'm going to talk about risk factors for developing insulin resistance. And being over the age of 40 is one of them. So if you are a woman over the age of 40, I would highly recommend that you keep listening because this can have a huge impact not only on your weight, because it's not just about your weight, but also about your overall health. If you watched on Tuesday, I told you that insulin resistance not only causes weight gain, but more importantly, it can be sort of like one of the root causes of very serious chronic diseases that affect women post-menopause, like type 2 diabetes and heart disease and Alzheimer's. So again, this is really important. You need to know your risk factors. All right, so we're going to dive in. Before I do, if you know the drill, if you've been watching me before, if you are watching me live, just say hello in the comments. And if you are joining the replay, just let me know, put replay in the comments, and that will be really helpful for me. Hello, Natasha. Okay, so we're going to start by talking about some of the risk factors for developing insulin resistance. And the first one that I'm going to talk about is basically eating the wrong food, specifically eating the wrong carbohydrates or too many carbohydrates. And basically the standard American diet or the standard Canadian diet, not what I would recommend. So what I want you to understand is that some foods are, and maybe you've heard of the glycemic index, and this is how quickly a food gets converted, or carbohydrate gets converted by your body into glucose. Go back to episode 1 on Monday if you want to understand how that whole thing works. But basically, anything that is considered high glycemic is going to get digested and absorbed very quickly by your body, and it's going to spike your blood glucose, and therefore it's going to spike your insulin. And the biggest culprits here, I bet you know what they are: sugar, starch, especially refined starch. So starch, like processed foods that are devoid of any fiber or any nutrients, and alcohol. Those are the big three, okay? And then there are low glycemic foods, and low glycemic foods are digested and absorbed very differently by the body. They're digested slowly, so they create a slow rise in blood glucose and insulin, and then it kind of stabilizes and then it drops off. So if your diet is currently very high in any of the things I mentioned, the high glycemic foods, sugar, refined carbohydrates, or alcohol, that is going to put you at risk of developing insulin resistance. We need to move away from those foods, especially in this time of our life. And I'm not perfect. I will let you know that in my 20s and most of my 30s, I ate like crap. I was definitely a refined carbohydrate junkie. So no judgment here, but I am letting you know that those foods are not going to serve you, and they're not going to make menopause or this whole perimenopause transition any easier. Okay, what other ones, other risk factors? The next one is a chronic positive energy imbalance, which is fancy for overeating. So even if you're eating the right foods, but you're overeating, you're still gonna spike that blood glucose level higher than it needs to be, and you're still gonna spike that insulin. So you need to learn how to eat the right quantities, okay? Third, a family history of diabetes. So if any of your grandparents or your parents have diabetes, type 2 diabetes, then that puts you at greater risk of developing insulin resistance because it's just in your genetics. Now, that being said, you have a lot of control over your genetics, so do not let that sway you, okay? The fourth one would be a diagnosis of gestational diabetes. So when you had your babies, when you were pregnant, if you were told you have gestational diabetes, then really, really pay attention to what I'm going to be telling you tomorrow. Next up is the shape of your body. And so most women are either like pear-shaped, where they sort of put on their extra fat around their hips and their thighs, or apple-shaped, where you put your weight on your belly. Apple-shaped right here. I am an apple-shaped girl. If you are apple-shaped, you are at a higher risk of developing insulin resistance because just carrying weight on your belly makes you more prone to insulin resistance. Okay? Sorry, I know, kind of a horrible thing, but it is what it is. Okay, PCOS, or polycystic ovarian syndrome. So if you've been diagnosed with PCOS, not all women with PCOS have insulin resistance, but it's definitely one of those hormonal imbalances that can create insulin resistance. Next up, a sedentary lifestyle. If you are not moving regularly, you are putting yourself at risk for insulin resistance. Next up, just having too much weight, just being overweight. Unfortunately, risk goes up when your BMI is over 29, okay? Certain medications make us more at risk, and the ones to think about would be antidepressants like SSRIs specifically, or steroid medications. Both of those, if you're taking them, you could always talk to your doctor and ask him about that, or her. The next up, now this is a super, 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 super important one, and I cannot overemphasize it, but stress. And I know I talk a lot about stress, but you need to understand, for my women out there that are like, oh, I have a great diet, I do not have to worry about insulin resistance. Just a second. You could have the most perfect diet. You could even be doing a ketogenic diet, and you could be exercising all the time, and you could still be insulin resistant if you have a very stressful life, because the hormone stress, cortisol, one of its roles is to raise blood glucose levels, okay? So same thing. So you can get those blood glucose levels up chronically, even if you're not eating foods that elevate your blood sugar levels. So really understanding stress. And then the last one, which I talked about at the very beginning, the last risk factor is just being a woman over the age of 40. Hence the little quote from Dr. Christiane Northrup that I put at the beginning. So let me explain why being in perimenopause or in menopause is putting us at greater risk. So there's a couple of different things that are happening here. Part of it is hormonal, and part of it is just life catching up with us. So, if you're just entering your 40s or you're mid 40, but you ate like crap in your 20s and your 30s, well, it could just be catching up with you. Or if you were sedentary in your entire 30s, it could just be catching up with you. So there's definitely that. A lot of women in their 40s and 50s just naturally find themselves to be more sedentary because their life is very hectic. Not all women, but for some women, that is definitely happening, especially sort of like in your 50s. But here's the other thing to understand is that when you go into perimenopause, especially in the later stages of perimenopause. So sort of like mid to late 40s into those 50s, depending on where you're at in your perimenopause transition here. But what happens is your estrogen levels start to drop. And there's two things that the research is looking at when it comes to the relationship between estrogen and insulin. Number one, estrogen plays a really big role in how your body distributes fat. So when you have healthy levels of estrogen, your body should again distribute fat around your hips and your bum, okay? And your thighs. That's where your extra fat should go. But when your estrogen levels start to go down, start to drop, which happens in the later phases of perimenopause, where your body distributes fat changes and it starts going to your belly. And this has everything to do with estrogen. It's just what it is, right? So we are right at war with belly fat when we move into perimenopause. Now, of course, as I said, when you have belly fat, you're more at risk for insulin resistance. So that's part one. So this is one of the reasons that we really have to start thinking about how we can manage this hormone insulin. The other part of it is that some research suggests that estrogen basically just makes us more insulin sensitive. It helps us to metabolize carbohydrates. So when we don't have as much estrogen, we can't metabolize them as well, and we just develop insulin resistance. Regardless of sort of what the factors are, you need to understand that as you get into those 40s, you're just more at risk. And so this is definitely one of the hormones, and I would argue probably the most important hormone that you really want to start thinking about, not only to manage your weight, but also just to have like vibrant health, right? Because it's not just about the weight, it really is also about the health. Okay, so let's talk about some signs that you can look out for that might indicate some insulin resistance. So if you are tired all the time, like if you are just like dragging your butt all day long, that is one sign. If you get hypoglycemic, so if you have like sort of like these blood sugar highs and these blood sugar lows, and then when you crash, like you crash and it's just like you get shaky and dizzy, that is like one of the sort of precursors to insulin resistance. So it's almost like sort of like stage one. So that was where I was at in my 30s. I really struggled with hypoglycemia and insomnia. And it wasn't until I learned how to stabilize my blood sugars that I started feeling way, way better. If you suddenly start gaining weight, although you have not made any changes to your nutrition or to your lifestyle, it could be a sign of insulin resistance. How many of you are like, yep, that's me. I hear this all the time from the women that I'm talking to. It's like, I haven't changed anything and I just suddenly gained 20 pounds. Well, that could be a sign of insulin resistance. Next up, you can look at your hip to waist ratio. So this is a fun one to do. Sometimes it's kind of frustrating, or it's, you're like, ma. But what you basically do is you measure your natural waistline, and then you measure your hips at the widest, and you take your waistline and you divide it by your hip. And if the ratio that you get is over 0.8, then you are at risk. That is a sign that you possibly have insulin resistance. If you carry most of your weight on your belly, like I said, it's a little bit of a vicious cycle here. And this happens a lot when it comes to all of this weight management and hormonal stuff. It's like insulin resistance causes belly fat, and belly fat causes insulin resistance. So it's like this kind of annoying vicious cycle. And there are lots of them when it comes to hormones. Sugar craving. So if you crave sugar all the time, or if you need to like have a sweet treat after you finish a meal, that could be a sign. If you have skin tags or dark patches, like especially on your neck, those are two signs of insulin resistance. If you have insomnia, like I said, what can happen is that could be like where in the middle of the night your blood sugar levels are dropping and your body's giving you this shot of adrenaline and cortisol to kind of boost those blood sugar levels up. So that, for me, that was a big warning sign. And then there are certain tests that you can do. Like, so if any of that resonated with you, or if you're like, okay, this might be me. So again, if you're a woman over 40, this is one of the tests that I would get done on an annual basis with your doctor, just to keep an eye on it, because you can kind of assess and you can look at the progression of you can look at like either your fasting glucose levels, and I have a little gadget here that I'm going to show you guys, but you can look at your fasting glucose level. So how much sugar is in your bloodstream when you wake up in the morning and you haven't had anything to eat for 12 hours. Obviously, that's going to tell you a lot about whether you have high blood glucose levels and therefore possibly high insulin. So that's one. You can also ask for a fasting insulin test. Like a blood test again. You can also look at your A1C levels. So your A1C levels, I believe it gives you sort of like almost like an average of your blood glucose over a 3-month period. And so what you want to do is, again, and you could look back at your history, like you could ask your doctor to check your history. I'm sure they've done these tests on you before. And so you can kind of look at your history and see where it's going. I remember working with a client, probably about 10 years ago. It was a guy, and he wanted to lose weight, and I wanted to give him incentives, so I asked him to go get these tests done. And we were comparing his sort of like what was happening to his A1C over the years, and I can't remember, maybe his fasting insulin, but we could see it on the rise. And so it was like, okay, look at the trend here. Like it's going up, 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 up. You're going to end up diabetic if you don't do something about this, right? So just looking at when you have the proof is in the pudding, right? So getting those blood tests, and I think again, doing it annually so that you can keep track of what is happening is going to be really, really important. Now, good news, here's the good news, is that if you are kind of like feeling like any of these signs or these symptoms or whatever you want to call them, if you recognize yourself and you're just thinking, oh my God, this is me, like don't freak out. It's, what you have to understand is that you can reverse insulin resistance. So you can get back in control of this. You can support healthy levels of insulin in your body and healthy levels of blood glucose in your body. And there are meds that help you with this, but there are also a lot of nutrition and lifestyle choices that you can make. And I am a big fan of nutrition and lifestyle choices, obviously, because I'm a nutrition coach. So that is what I do. So what are they? That is what we're talking about tomorrow. So you've got to tune back in tomorrow. And tomorrow I'm going to be giving you 14 different strategies, all to do with nutrition, all to do with lifestyle, that will help you to really just manage your blood glucose and manage your insulin. And again, this is going to help you not only manage your weight, not only manage how you experience perimenopause, but also possibly prevent some chronic conditions later on in life, because the choices that we make now are so important, because they're going to determine how we live our older ages. Like when we're in our 60s and 70s, or 80s, 60s still young, right? But when we're in our 70s and 80s and we're getting to be a little bit older, how do you want to live those years? Do you want to be on 5 different meds and not able to do something? Or do you want to live a nice, vibrant life? That is why this is so important. Okay, so I'm going to show you, last little thing, I'm going to show you this little test. So this is such a cool device. So this is a blood glucose monitor, and they give these to type 2 diabetics so that they can figure out where their blood glucose levels are at and how much insulin they should be taking, etc. But this is such a cool tool, because if you're totally into tracking, and biohacking and all that stuff, this will tell you so much information. And so what you do, I'm going to show you right now, is you get these little strips and you put them in your little device, and then you got to prick your finger. It's really not that bad. And you get a little bit of blood. Okay, I don't have much here. It really does not require too much. And then you put that little bit of blood inside your meter. Did you hear that beep? And it's going to tell you what your current blood glucose levels are at. So mine are currently at 6.4. I had a meal about 1 hour ago, so that's a pretty normal reading for me, because as soon as you eat, your blood glucose is going to go up, right? That is just what happens. And it doesn't matter what you're eating. Even though I ate a lower carb meal, right? I had protein. Protein elevates blood glucose levels. Fat a little bit, but not much, and carbohydrates. My carbohydrates today were nuts and arugula, so very normal that it didn't go up that much. When I wake up in the morning, oftentimes this is below 5, and so I can monitor my blood glucose, and this tells me a lot about my health from the inside out. So I think these cost about $30. You can pick them up at pretty much any pharmacy. That can tell you a lot, right? You could do one of those tests and wake up tomorrow and learn a lot about insulin resistance and your current health status. So anyways, there you have it. That is it for today. Remember, tomorrow is all about the practical implications or the practical implementations or advice on how to manage your insulin. But I really wanted to take the past 3 days to explain why it's so important to really understand why insulin needs to be balanced out, and help you to understand your risk factors. And then tomorrow we jump into what to do about it. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.